I'd like to welcome you to ISELP In Motion, our podcast, and my guest today at AEP is Emily Sandler. And welcome, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
Well, and Emily is a saint for doing this. She tried to gracefully back out a couple times, but she had a really good reason, which is she's flown in from the Asian Games.
Asian Championships, correct,
yeah.
In Thailand.
And just landed yesterday and is shaking off a wicked jet lag. But really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk a little bit. Emily and I are obviously old friends, so I know her well. But I think the listeners would be really interested in your journey on how you got here.
How I got here. I grew up in Colorado, riding in Pony Club, grew up riding event horses, and graduated from Colorado State in 2000. And then I did an internship at Ridden Riddle Equine Hospital. And following that internship, I moved to California and I worked at Alamo Pintado for a year, and then opened a private practice in Southern California.
And now somewhere along there, you got married and had a child, right?
I do. I have a 15-year-old son and my husband, Jeremy, and we live in San Diego County.
And then additionally, you got involved with the FEI along that path. And so tell us how you did that.
Well, early on, even when I was in veterinary school in undergrad, I did some work for USEF as a testing technician through their drug testing program. So I sort of got my feet wet in the regulatory area and liked it. And then when I moved to Southern California and after I graduated, I started attending your FEI courses, mostly because that was always the best medication discussion. So as a practitioner, I wanted to stay current on, the most current information on drugs and medications and testing. And so it was really through those courses I got interested in the FEI delegate work as well, and eventually became a delegate in about 2006.
And do you still drug test any?
I do. I'm still an active one of the USEF drug testers and also do some medication control for FEI. Okay.
And then obviously you do more than that with FEI. You do quite little bit here. So describe that to me.
So several areas of FEI. Obviously, I'm an active delegate in all the disciplines except endurance. And I also serve as one of the course instructors like you do as well. And that's been a really interesting opportunity to help bring other veterinarians into the field and do some traveling with it as well.
And it keeps you current, obviously,
yeah,
because
exactly.
you've got to go through all the rules and the slides to be able to teach that to other veterinarians.
For sure, and if you don't facilitate them, then you take them. So you can either be on one side or the other. I always say it's my way of not having to take one if I facilitate one. So.
Well, and now you've done, like I say, you just came back from the Asian FEI championships, but you've done numerous others. Tell us where you've been around the world with FEI.
Well, I was a treating vet in Rio for the Olympics in Rio, and then after that, and actually during that time, I was going to Spruce Meadows quite a lot for their summer series as a delegate, and then ended up doing WAG in Tryon. That was kind of the first big one, and then was a member of the commission in Tokyo.
Okay.
And then following that was foreign vet delegate in Paris, which was an amazing experience.
So now describe to the listeners who may not be so familiar, and you can just take your experience because you've done so much, but the various positions that we're talking about that FEI and the acronym, the alphabet soup
yes.
of FEI. So describe that for me if you can.
I know I always like to say, in France they speak French, and in Spain they speak Spanish, and at FEI they speak in acronyms. But
That's true.
The VC, or Veterinary Commission as they often call it, is usually made up of either 3 or 4 veterinarians from around the world, depending on the competition. So, for instance, in Paris, there was myself and Juliana from Brazil and Thierry from France and Julius Peters from from Holland. So usually it represents a large number of countries for the commission.
And that's the Veterinary Commission, and then a member of that is the foreign veterinary delegate, and that was you.
Yes.
Okay. And that's the ranking veterinary delegate.
Yes, so technically the foreign veterinary delegate is actually a technical delegate of the games. So that is sort of
technical judge.
Judge, exactly.
Yeah. And then there's usually a president of the commission, and that tends to be the local person oftentimes.
Yeah, often that's the veterinarian from that country. So in France, the president was French. In the U.S. or in 28, the president will likely be American.
Right. And is just a background for the listeners. It used to be that the president of the commission was the local person and did the local organization. And then as things became more complex and complicated, and I think it was about the Korean Games, so it would have been about 92 that the change occurred to where they started having what used to be a veterinary coordinator is now called a veterinary services manager, who then comes in and actually organizes that, spends an inordinate amount of time and a lot of work making sure the veterinary commission, all the treating vets, all the other people have facilities, have the badges they need to move around and make it all work. And then that person kind of works in the background and then prepares things. When the veterinary commission arrives, then they're then sitting there and saying, okay, we're going to do this, and that veterinary services manager makes sure that it's all there for them.
For sure, and that can be even a year-long, job for someone local,
or multiple years.
Or multiple years. Yeah, typically the VSM or veterinary services manager is named 2 years in advance for a major games like that, and they're involved in organizing all the volunteer veterinarians, making sure all the emergency preparations are done, referral hospitals. That's sort of part of the process that's going on now for the future, and that's typically a local person.
Right. And so then the other levels, and your level, OV level 4, correct?
Correct.
OV meaning official veterinarian.
Correct.
Right. And so just again doing this for the listeners, OV level 1 is now the kind of level for the veterinary services manager and the entry level into the veterinary officials of FEI, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so you sort of start out, if you're interested in getting involved in the FEI, you start with being a permitted treating veterinarian or a PTV. And these are the entry level position. Helpful to be that if you're vaccinating FEI horses or getting involved with any treatment at FEI competitions, you'll need to be a PTV, so that you do, through your federation, apply to become a permitted treating veterinarian. And then once you're a permitted treating veterinarian, you can take an online course and apply to be an OV1, like you said, official veterinarian level 1, which you need to be in order to be a veterinary services manager for an FEI competition. Right. And then once you're an OV1, you can then do some apprenticeships and apply to be an OV2, and you also need to take one of those FEI courses we talked about a little bit. And then at that point, you become a quote delegate, and then you're able to officiate as a delegate in an FEI competition.
And then what are the other 2 levels?
So again, it's a graduating system. So once you've been an OV 2, I believe, for 3 years and have officiated at a minimum of 10 events, you can then apply to become an OV3.
Right.
And at that point, basically, once you're an OV3, you're qualified to officiate as a delegate at most events, with the exception of a Games or World Championship.
Right.
And then that
you'd be an OV4.
Exactly. So once you've been an OV3 for a while and have done a fair number of events, it's sort of on a basis of what the FEI thinks there's a demand basically in your country. So there'll be a group of level 4 delegates from most active countries.
And what advice do you have for our listeners who are sitting there and going, oh, wow, I've always wanted to go to an Olympic Games, and how do I do that? And, obviously, you're not going to start at the Olympics.
Yeah.
You're going to start on the pathway that you're describing, but do you have advice for them?
Get involved in as many events as you can. Everybody asks me, how did this come to be? I honestly have no idea. But, continue getting involved in events and work your way through the levels.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting, and we all did it different ways. My pathway was actually a group of young riders when I practiced in Arizona. And so the stable that they were all at and had a very enthusiastic trainer, and so he kind of somehow hoodwinked me into working with these event horses, which I came from a quarter horse background. I have no idea what an event horse was. And then I learned, and he kept dragging me along as a volunteer. I started as the team vet for that team, and then I became the chef to keep. Because they couldn't find anyone else to do it. And then I kept getting involved, and then eventually I became on the board of USEA, and then I went to the board of USEF, and then I started mentoring and having Marty Simonson, who was a legend in the team, and he mentored me at no doubt some personal angst to him, but he was very gracious about me, and I eventually became team vet for a period of time, and then I got interested in being the veterinary services manager for Atlanta, and that was my start to it all. And then I just happened to be one of the old guys who's hung around a long time. But you and I have an interesting, we have numerous links in our career, but one of the more interesting ones maybe for the listeners is we're the only 2 Americans who have ever been a foreign veterinary delegate at an Olympics. So what was your experience like in Paris?
Paris was definitely a pinnacle. It was great. It was an iconic venue. There probably will never be a venue that looks like that again. It had some interesting challenges, particularly the cross-country course running around the canals created an interesting potential problem. And one of their solutions, I was very impressed that all fire companies, fire stations in France actually have animal experts, animal rescue experts. So they took volunteers from many of the fire departments who came out on cross-country day, and they actually had 6 boats in the water with personnel in wetsuits. In case horses or riders ended up in the canal, they had a plan for how to get them out.
That's definitely unique. That was never in my experience.
No, I've never seen anything like it. So it was the preparations were pretty extensive, and it was very interesting. And back a little bit to my journey, I met Dr. Karen Nyrop through my involvement with FEI, and she definitely was a driving force and a mentor for me in this path. And I can't think of how many times I thought to myself, what would Karen do now?
And Karen, an amazing veterinarian and heavily involved in Kentucky and what used to be Rolex and now Kentucky 3-day event. And someone lost too soon to us, but a great person to work with over the years.
For sure.
Now, we all have a story or two about our Olympic moment as foreign veterinary delegate. And the foreign veterinary delegate's interesting when you finally get to that point, because you get some interesting little Olympic perks. And the Olympic perks are intriguing because the kind of big deal at an Olympics is your badge and where you can go with that badge. So tell us a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because when I was in Tokyo, the significance of the badge didn't matter because we were all
COVID.
Because we were in COVID, exactly.
Yes.
So the point of this piece is I had no idea what those badges meant. So when I arrived in Paris, I found out that my badge would actually allow me to go to any venue for any of the sports, which for me didn't really matter because I did not have time to go to any other venues. However, my best friend came with me, and she had my mirrored badge, so she took full advantage, was able to go to tennis and gymnastics and swimming, all of it, and was able to get entry to watch the event. So she was living her best life for 2 weeks, for sure.
Yeah, I remember the time I figured out. I was at Sydney, and my two Olympics were, as foreign veterinary delegate, were Sydney and London, and the driver picked me up from the airport and brought me to the hotel, and then I slept off my jet lag, and then showed up at the venue, and then very nice, as a captain in the armed forces volunteering there in Australia. And so I go, and I'd gotten his number before I left, and I go out and I do my work at the venue all day, and then I go, well, I've got to call my driver now. And foreign veterinary delegates get a driver, and the others don't get a driver, so you don't make a big deal about it. And but I call him and I go, hey, are you anywhere in the area that you could pick me up and take me back? Assuming it was a pool service. And he goes, yeah, I'm here. I'm in the parking lot. It's where I've been all day waiting on you. I felt awful. I was going, oh my gosh. And that was just the way. I had a driver assigned to me, and then my wife came over, and I had, in the Olympic setup, and you'll have to tell me if yours is the same, we had one dark day where we didn't run competition. Do they do that? Is it scheduled that way now, or is it different?
Well, Paris, I think the idea is that it's still scheduled that way, but Paris was so condensed because of the way the horses were coming in and out just the day before the horse inspection, because it was basically a trailered-in Olympics versus how most of the horses fly in advance.
Right.
So in this case, we didn't really have a dark day, but it was a rolling entry with the trailers arriving.
Because and your spouse gets a similar badging that you do. So when she came in, then I took the dark day, and I said, I'll be available by phone, but other than that, I'm going to come early in the morning and check in, and I'm going to come back late in the evening physically, but the rest of the time, I'm going to the Olympics. So I took the driver and my wife, and we went everywhere. We got to see Americans get gold medals in track and field, and we went and watched diving, and it was amazing because you can just take that badge that you've got, and everyone else, has bought tickets years in advance and done all this, but you, because of the badge as the foreign veterinary delegate, get to just walk up, flash the badge, and say, where's the Olympic family area? And then you walk right down front to the Olympic family where you can pick up any seat. And then and if you get hungry or thirsty, there's the Olympic family restaurant right behind you. You just go and have lunch there. And we had more fun in that day that I got off and did it. And it was a blast. And then the really funny part is, and this happened at both Sydney and London. So the gals at the place, so my wife flies home, and then they very rapidly, if they had dark hair like she does, they then showed up very rapidly, and they go, Dr. Allen, could we borrow Ray's badge? And then, and so I had all these different girls come up and ask me for that, and I, of course, handed it. I said, bring it back to me. And then the next day, another one would ask. And so at the end of the period, I got a picture with all the gals who had been Ray, my wife, and they all clustered around me, and we took a picture so I could send back to her.
Okay, well, be sure not to tell anyone that story.
I think it's a little late for that. But it is amazing what being the foreign veterinary delegate now has a lot of responsibilities. I don't mean to make it sound like it's all fun and games. And so tell me some of the responsibilities and the work and the challenges that you faced when you were in Paris as a foreign veterinary delegate.
Well, I think one thing that changed the atmosphere a little bit right before the games was the release of the video of Charlotte Dujardin and that situation. So I think we felt a lot of pressure right at the beginning to make sure that the overall welfare picture was really well handled at the games. And they actually had a new position, the sort of welfare coordinator for the games that hadn't existed before. So Richard Cord, who's the national head vet for France, he was in that position, monitoring all of the warm-ups, the competition themselves. So we were under a lot of pressure from the welfare space, but the games turned out to be very safe. We had really minimal injuries. And, I think typically we're all used to having horse-related media interested in equestrian events, but it was very different atmosphere there because we had Rutgers and, international news agencies there to interview people, and they were looking for
a story.
And abuse was high on that list. Yeah. So I think that changed the emotion and the mood in the beginning, and it sort of gradually got better as the games went on, but definitely we felt like there was some pressure there. Also, leading up to the games, we'd had that sort of high-profile death in Riyadh at the World Cup final related to some vitamin administration, and you have to remember this was before FEI changed the recent rules where we don't allow
that sort of thing.
Injectable vitamins and minerals during the period of the event. Right. So this preceded that. So we had multiple team vet meetings, discussing what was going to be injected and sort of a plea in general to not inject things that could be given orally in a more safe manner. So I think that sort of really was the mood at the beginning, just trying to make the games as safe as possible.
Well, and there's always some challenge, and you never know what it's going to be. And like you said, you had a few of those crop up right before Paris. In mine, if I go back, and I go all the way back to Atlanta, where I was veterinary services manager, what the challenge of that one is because of the heat and humidity of an Atlanta summer, there was real concern about could horses do the 3-day event. And back then, of course, it was long format, which was a bit more of a challenge than it is today athletically to the horses.
For sure.
From a fitness standpoint. And so we luckily had a long lead up to that. We didn't have our challenges thrown right in front of us, right in front of the competition. We had a period of time where we tried to address those situations where we said, okay, well, what challenges do the horses have in heat and humidity if they're trying to do a full format 3-day event, and should we modify it? And this whole package of millions of dollars worth of research came out and became called The Road to Atlanta, and there was so much research done, it had to be published in 2 segments. And Leo Jeffcott, numerous other people who were really instrumental in that research, Catherine Cohn, really did some interesting work. And what we proved during that lead up to the games is that we could modify the competition somewhat and make it less like a full long format and actually a bit more like it looks today, except no steeplechase. There we just limited the steeplechase. So, and that turned out to be kind of the battle of us, the horse industries, against what were very rabid at the time anti. They did not want to see the horse in sport, and this was PETA, HSUS. They're a little different nowadays, but back then they were pretty rabid about it. And we proved to them, that we care. Promise me, guys, we're talking to them, we care more than you do about these horses. You just don't want to see the horse in sport. We want to see them compete successfully and be happy campers through the entire deal. And we had battles with these groups. I mean, from a figurative standpoint, in that we actually had dueling press interviews in big areas. We, as the veterinary services manager, I had to show up at press conferences. There were 40 physicians talking about human stressors and the heat and humidity, and 1 veterinarian. And so some real interesting challenges, but that's what I think the listeners may not appreciate, is that there's all these people in the background working to make sure that the horse in sport is safe and can do the job, and that now it's not a lot of that was, yes, you've got to do the research, you've got to present the research, and now it's a bit more of, you also have to educate the public who doesn't know much about the horse in sport.
For sure.
And how have you found the best way to go about that? I realize that's a loaded leading question, but tell me what you think.
Well, first I'd like to say we're still referencing and using a lot of that data that came from the road to Atlanta. I think those are still very, very commonly referenced and used materials. I mean, even the idea, we're still trying to get rid of this idea that you can't put cold water on a hot horse, right? I mean, all of that data came from what you guys did leading up to Atlanta, and it's hard to break those habits. You'll still find people today. It's much less common who will bring a hot horse and not want to put cold water right on their muscles, and we're still educating the historical way we did things. So I think the same thing is happening in sort of the social acceptance of horse sport now. Things that were common practice maybe are not palatable to the current social scene. And so I think we're growing, but I think it's also interesting that you were having the same type of challenges before Atlanta, and that we are in 1996. The issues maybe are somewhat different, but when it comes right down to it, it's the same. It's this sort of maintaining this social license of horses in sport. And I think it's twofold. I think it's education of the public, which is never easy, but I think we have to remember they don't differentiate these sports. In general, they don't separate racing from eventing, from cutting, from driving. To them, it may just all be horses in sport. And I think it's important to continue to show that we are at least as concerned as they are, and that our media shows the use of horses in a positive light. And I think that has to be on the forefront, from grooms to trainers to riders. It's veterinarians, farriers. It's everyone's responsibility.
And I think it's interesting, sometimes, and here we're talking about people who don't really know anything about sports. They happen to turn on the television and see eventing in the Olympics or some equestrian sport, or the way some of them get it nowadays, their version of horses and sport and riding is Yellowstone.
Right.
And so Taylor Sheridan is educating them.
Right.
But, ours is a much deeper perspective because we know how much work goes into the research, the regulations, trying to keep them safe. I love it. There's people who talk about drug and medication issues like, well, you're spending all that money and look, you're only catching 70 people and I don't think half of them should even be caught. What they don't get is the fact that there is monitoring and testing and regulatory rules enacted is we're deterring
totally
a huge segment of people from doing the bad things that we as veterinarians don't want to see done to horses. We want horses to compete. Sure, they can go sit in a pasture, okay? And that may be fun. I don't know, I'm not a horse. But I also know that when I competed horses, they loved doing the job they were doing. And when I got to work with Olympic team members or see the sport happening in an Olympics or a World Equestrian Games, those horses love doing that. They'd rather do that than anything. And so I think that somehow we've got to get that out to the public better. We do it, and we work hard at it, but it's hard to get it there sometimes.
Yeah. And these programs are a huge deterrent. The fact that we're only detecting a low number of positive samples, I think, is a positive. I think it means that the program is working to a certain extent.
Well, and then the dollar justification, say USEF, they spread that amongst all the competitors, and then they try to get out to as many of the horse shows as they can get out to, and show up at ones they maybe don't test regularly.
Yeah.
And that's the deterrent effect of it. And, they just don't realize all this is going on in the background, and it's an active aspect of it that if you just sit and look at some numbers, and to me, if a horse was illegally medicated and injured or died from that, what monetary value do you put on that?
Yeah, that's a failure of our whole program, right?
Exactly. I mean, I don't think I can put a price on that.
Yeah, agreed.
And so, you in particular who have come up through the ranks as a testing veterinarian, you've seen the hard part of that, and you've seen people who are happy to submit their horse to testing, and you've seen people who are very angry at the testers when they
Correct.
showed up.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
I think just taking each case as it comes along and try to educate as much as possible. I did have one time someone just put their horse in a trailer and drove away. Hard to reason with that. Yeah, I recommended against it, that it would have further consequences, and it did. But in essence, you can only do what you can do. And I've been doing it in the same area for so long. I feel like I have a good rapport with the trainers and officials, and so far it's gone well.
Well, I know you, Emily, so I know you will handle it with grace and education. So I remember when I became chair of the Drug and Medication Program, took over the Veterinary Committee years ago, and my older son was competing. And so he's off at an event, and he was doing very well in the event, and then comes the stadium jumping portion, and the horse was distracted, did not do well, and so I think he dropped from 3rd to 10th. And but obviously he had already been picked by the person doing the medication testing, who, of course, I'm chair of the program. I don't communicate. They're testing in a manner that's random, or they're picking people who are probably going to win. And so I'm sitting there with my wife, and we're commiserating on how he had a rough go at the end, and he didn't finish strong. And I get a phone call, and it says, "Dad, I just got picked up by the drug testers. What should I do?" And I go with them. And he goes, "Should I tell them who you are?" And I go, "No.
Probably not.
You are just a competitor. They are trying to do their job. Go with them, assist them, take care of your horse, and they're going to let you take care of your horse, but assist them in the process. Let it happen." I said, "I'll stroll by later and say hi." But, it's people, there are some people, they win a lot and they get drug tested a lot. Other people who have never been picked by a drug tester in their entire career, and they get picked and they're shocked.
And I always tell them they're getting something for their drug fee for the day. So hopefully most people have been tested along the way sometime, but occasionally you'll come across someone who says, "Oh, I haven't been tested in 10 years, or this is the first time I've been tested." Maybe they're new to the sport. And I always say, "Yeah, you now got something for your drug fee for today."
And I think it's wonderful. I mean, the USEF program, which, as you know, predates FEI's drug and medication testing program, and has been there for a long time, was the industry standard and still is today. And it's a multi-million-dollar program that at its front is deterrent. And we stop people from doing bad things to horses.
For sure.
By the existence of the program and the fact that it is large and in a lot of places. And you being a drug tester in that program, I mean, you're the pointy end of the spear.
We're kind of on the front lines of
exactly.
it. There's a large dedicated group of veterinarians participating in the program for sure.
Yeah, and FEI too.
Yeah,
and they do a tremendous job. Yeah. So tell me your favorite story at one of your many competitions you've been to. And like I say, you just came back from the Asian Games, but you've been all over the world. So what's one of your most entertaining stories that you can share with us?
I'm trying to think about entertaining stories. I would say for sure a highlight was when the last horse crossed the finish line in the cross-country course at Paris, and in the control room, everyone stood up and clapped, and that was a moment. There a lot of preparation went into making sure that was safe and the way it went. So I would say that was probably a highlight for Paris, was watching the last horse cross the finish line in the cross-country.
And you develop a camaraderie with these people that you've been preparing for this moment. You've done a test event the summer before. You've done all this work. And to see it come to fruition and know that those horses all got around safe, it was a great competition, and you just kind of get to take a big, deep breath and go, wow.
And I think the thing that is the greatest part of being involved in FEI is the friendships that you create with the other officials around the world. It is a bit of a traveling circus, and it's really neat to develop relationships with people all over.
And I think back, I have friendships with people in dozens of countries that I have served with and been on the front lines with them doing a competition, and then I may see them again later that year at another competition. I may not see them for 10 years.
Exactly. That is a fun part of it, is to just meet people from all over, and everybody's in the same boat. I mean, getting involved in these are basically volunteer positions. No one's making a living doing this, but those relationships make it all worth it for sure.
Yeah. No, it's amazing, and I like I say, I'm at the dwindling end of my career on this, but you're right in the middle of it, and I really admire the work you do and how hard you work at it. And again, thanks for showing up jet lagged to this podcast, because I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. It's
all right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this session of ISELP In Motion, and thank you to Emily particularly.
Thank you.